Hey there, Legal Tea listeners. This is your host, Jenny Roselle. Today's episode of Legal Tea is on the Cautionary Tales topic. And on these Cautionary Tales episodes, we normally talk about real-life cases with real-life clients that are things me or my office have actually worked on, or they're things that I think are just generally good things to know and be aware of, so that you, my friend, do not turn into a cautionary tale on this podcast one day. Well, today is inspired by some things I recently saw online. Hilariously, I had a couple tweets on Twitter, or now X, go viral, and there was a lot of talk on that tweet about blended families and estate planning, and specifically family fights or family breakdowns due to a biological parent passing away, and then the step-parent changing the estate plan to remove or reduce the kids' shares. I've seen it happen multiple times, actually, and today is about one of those examples. So let's dive in. Now, in my little estate and elder law world, we, of course, help married couples and unmarried couples and significant others as well all the time, right? Sometimes couples come in and they think that there's such thing as like a joint last will and testament. Well, that's not a thing, at least here in Indiana, and I don't even specifically know of a state that is such a thing, but I digress. So when you do a last will and testament, you do it for yourself, like your name is at the top of the document, last will and testament of your name. While a lot of married couples, their wills say the same thing and kind of look alike too, that, everything to each other first and then everything to so-and-so beneficiaries. Regardless, you still each have a will referencing each other and then referencing the next beneficiaries after each other. Follow so far, right? Well, that is fine and dandy, except did you know that upon the first death of you and your spouse, the surviving spouse can actually just create a new will and change who the beneficiaries are? Let's talk about an example. Say you and your spouse are a blended family, as in each of you have kids, but not with each other. And maybe you get this wonderful idea to do some estate planning, and you end up saying, okay, we are going to leave everything to each other, and then we'll leave everything equally to all the kids. And then say you pass away. Your spouse could get a new will and yank out your kids. Crazy, right? Well, on today's cautionary tale, a similar thing happened to these clients, and we're going to name them Bob and Sally. Now, Bob was the husband here, and he had no children, but had a very dear niece to him. Sally, the wife, did have a child. So when we met with Bob and Sally to do some estate planning, we get to chatting about, kind of who is going where, as in who is going to serve as executor and healthcare representative and power of attorney. And finally, we get to the question of beneficiary. Transparently, the conversation got a little heated because Bob wanted his niece and Sally's child as equal beneficiaries, and Sally did not want Bob's niece listed as a beneficiary in her will. I think ultimately Sally just sort of gave up and said, heck with it. So Bob and Sally do their wills, and Bob's niece and Sally's child get placed as backup beneficiaries, after Bob and Sally both pass away, of course. Well, fast forward some time, actually not a ton of time either, like maybe 6 months or so. And my office gets a call from Sally, totally frantic. Bob unexpectedly passed away. Completely unexpectedly, was in great health, when we last saw him 6 months prior. And she was calling one day after Bob had died. I think it was on a Sunday that it happened, and she called on Monday. Now, our normal office protocol after someone passes away is to schedule a call with one of our paralegals that specifically helps families in the after-death process. And we do that just to really get some immediate questions answered, give them some peace of mind, etc. So Sally calls on Monday, and we get that phone call set up with a paralegal, I think for the following day, Tuesday. So if you're keeping track, that's a mere 2 days after Bob died. Most of the time, this call with the paralegal really involves kind of the logistics, like, okay, talk to us about the assets, how are they titled, give them some guidance on what they should and could pay, how can they pay for X, Y, and Z, etc. Well, not for Sally. So the paralegal hops on the phone, and instead of Sally really talking about what she needs to be doing following Bob's death, she kicks things off by talking about what changes she wants to make to her will. That is, she wants to cut out Bob's niece. And I suppose people grieve and react and cope in all sorts of different ways. So perhaps her staying in kind of this business mode was how she was going to grieve and cope. And in her defense, I see a lot of clients do this following the death of a loved one. They just don't pop their head up to grieve. They just go straight into business mode. I'm not a psychologist, but that can't be exactly good. But anyway, so Sally has this phone call with our paralegal, and the paralegal, of course, lets us know what Sally's wanting. So we asked the paralegal to get Sally scheduled on one of our attorney's calendar just to kind of bring her in and discuss everything. So, of course, she was wanting to, like I said, take out Bob's niece. And unfortunately for the niece, and maybe not what you guys want to hear, Legal Tea listeners, this really reminds me of something that I think is really important. It's something I've talked about here on Legal Tea before. That is, your estate plan is your plan. So honestly, if that's what she wanted to do, she's absolutely entitled to do it, guys. Just because someone else does not think that that's maybe morally right or ethically right, it's her plan. I say that, but also let me be loud and clear about something. There are estate planning options that would have definitely prevented this. So yes, you can create an estate plan to prevent exactly what happened here with Bob and Sally. Unfortunately, it just requires more planning than maybe you want to do, and it definitely requires more than just a last will and testament. Bob and Sally could have done more planning through a trust or multiple trusts, but more planning comes with a touch more expense, like legal fees, and they didn't want to spend the money. Well, the result of that decision is that Bob's niece is not going to get anything. In case, I guess she could change her mind between now and when she passes away, but currently she's not getting anything. So let's talk about how this is done, or maybe how this can be prevented. If this is something you have concerns about, to do an estate plan and provide instructions for what happens at the first death, like not allowing the other spouse to make beneficiary changes, for example, it is likely going to involve a trust. And what happens when you have a trust, whether revocable or irrevocable, is that you actually take your assets and you place them in the name of the trust. It's a process called funding, Funding. So say, for example, my husband and I have a trust, and we take our house that is owned by Justin and Jenny, and we put the house in the name of Justin and Jenny as trustees of whatever we name our trust. So let's call it, the old trustee trust. So our trust is now in the name of the old trustee trust, and we also move our checking and savings into the old trustee trust, the life insurance, investments, etc. Super long story short, we own very little in our personal names. Our trust owns it all. So when one of us passes away, the trust dictates what happens and when. And one way to accomplish protection against your spouse changing things up after you pass away is to have the trust turn, kind of quote, irrevocable upon the first passing. And if it's carefully crafted or carefully drafted, the trust can be set up in a way that allows someone, it could be the spouse or it doesn't have to be either, but allows that someone to make changes to the trust. Say, what if the law changes and the trust needs to be amended due to the change in the law? though that person cannot change like substantive provisions, like who gets what and how much. That would certainly protect the beneficiaries from getting cut out, huh? Now, a little insider secret, trusts are always more expensive from a legal fee perspective than just doing wills. But they not only provide a ton of benefits compared to a will, they're also just more work on my side of the table because we have to go through that funding process of getting your assets transferred into the trust. You could do everything I just talked about through a will, where at the first passing, assets go through the will and the will creates trusts inside it that are called testamentary trusts. But a little thing about those is, for those trusts to govern assets, the assets would have to go through probate, meaning they would have to be individually owned and not beneficiary designated. And I want to touch on probate. Probate has a little bit of a reputation out there. Many will try to make it sound like it's your worst nightmare come true. So long as there's not litigation and, upset people in the mix, it's really not that scary. If we have a lot of amicable people and everything is on the up and up, it's not scary. It's annoying. It's more annoying than anything. It takes a while. It's a public process, meaning if, nosy neighbor wants to snoop, they can snoop online. And it's costly. And it's costly because of the legal fees. So if we wanted to do just a will and put trusts inside of it to gain protection from beneficiaries getting cut out, we've got the cost of the will, which is pretty minimal, but then the cost of probate later, which is not minimal. So most of the time, like 99.99999% of the time, doing a will and having to probate that will later will end up being more expensive than doing trust planning to accomplish all of this that we're talking about and also avoiding probate. Now, this probably doesn't come as a surprise, but money on the table changes people, right? Perhaps it's because I do this estate stuff for a living. I'm just super used to talking about this kind of stuff, but I think it's a very fair conversation to bring up to your spouse, especially if you have just a will, guys, and are part of a blended family. Or even if you're not part of a blended family, but you and your spouse have maybe different opinions on who should inherit and how much. I've actually met with clients plenty of times that, dad thinks Johnny, the son, is a bozo, and mom thinks Johnny is like gold star child. Would dad reduce Johnny's share, if mom passed away before him? Maybe, maybe not. But could he? 100% yes. Unless there's some solid estate planning in place. Alrighty, my friends, let's wrap up this episode. Let's shift to a sneak peek of next week, which we are circling back to the current trends topic, where we talk about things that are going on currently that impact my estate and elder law world, or maybe things that I've just kind of stumbled on the news or social media that is relevant to this podcast. Well, if you follow me on Twitter or X, I posted that I was feeling a bit uninspired of what I was going to, talk about for next week's episode. So I need to peruse through those and maybe kind of fill in some gaps. And if you turned in last week, you also know I was running a little behind. So I'm just trying to kind of put what the upcoming topics are, but I don't have what we're going to talk about next week as of this very moment. But I promise I'll get better at this. Next week, just know it's a current trends topic. So tune in for that episode next week. Until then, be well and talk soon.